and then Carrie came in about a year ago. She comes back from fashion, and Carrie actually was the first. She did the first generative fashion ad for Paris Fashion Week.
Oh, okay.
So essentially what they've done, and she's kind of pioneered the space, we think this was the first one to where they fully generated the scene. So it was like, it was called Thally is the brand.
Okay.
And essentially it's like a handbag.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know what you're doing.
And so they went and they generated, she worked with a photographer, and then she went and found models and licensed their face, licensed their likeness.
Yes, and I saw, that was part, I don't know if that was part of the London presentation, but that to me was a fascinating arc because you kind of look at the very real life cycle of like, hey, I'm a model, hey, I've got a family now. They kind of drop me from the agency or they, but you license your likeness, or I guess in a weird way, like Bruce Willis did that, right? Like he licensed his like,
whole thing, yeah.
he got to that point where he couldn't really act, and so he licensed it. And it's an interesting concept because, yeah, you can kind of keep yourself going, keep your career going. It's got a lot of interesting possibilities with it.
It does. I think because what these, like a studio that wants to use talent or photography or a brand that has their it person, their it girl for the season or whatever, the efficiencies that they're looking for with AI is speed and flexibility.
Right. Or in the classic DAM market, as we say, adaptation and market. Like that's a classic one, right? You want to very quickly disseminate something out. Kind of like the equivalent of rich media translations, just very, very quickly.
Agreed.
Just adapt them, deliver them. Yeah, I get it.
But at the same time, I don't think that anyone has a desire to cut the human out of it, because they still want you out being seen at shows and in appearances. So if you fully generate something that's just created from scratch, you don't get that connection.
I wonder about that. I don't think it's malicious, but I think it's maybe the reverse. I think they're maybe just not thinking about it. Like they just throw out the taglines like, this won't affect graphic designers. This won't affect. Well, yeah, it will. Like in a pretty big way. And I don't think it's like they're out to get them. But on the flip side, they're also not advocating for them. They're not being like, all right. Well, Adobe is to a certain extent, I guess, with Firefly. They're trying to be like, look, we're gonna preserve the creative rights and have that kind of integrity. But I don't think that's true more broadly. So yeah, I mean, and I suppose it's kind of like in some ways it's kind of like Spotify. Like you can say yes, profits are greatly diminished, but on the other hand, it's a bit of an equalizer, right? Like a lot of bands get exposure that they wouldn't have had before.
Correct.
They get a certain level of residuals, and it may not be millions and millions of dollars, but that's kind of an interesting piece because it does, right? It kind of levels out.
It levels out. Gives people
those revenue
access.
streams, right? Yeah.
And I think that the way that we're going is efficiency and enablement and kind of opening the ecosystem. And AI is kind of a balance, but it's one of those things to where the gatekeepers aren't necessarily there, because it used to be that the amount of money and capital that it took to stand up a major studio or it took up to create these pipelines, that was their moat. Right? And if bands or if actors or if models can start to remove some of those moats and go direct to consumers, we're seeing it right now with even news personalities that are doing their own podcasts or doing their own shows, like Rogan, right? Blew up, and now he's kind of gone around everybody. I think the same thing is true. So when Carrie's doing these Thally things, if I'm a model, I want to be able to control. Or go back to these kids that are coming up now, right? Like in college football, right? In high school even, right? With name, image, and likeness, now they can monetize themselves. But at the same time, do their coaches want them out running around to do Bob's Auto Dealer Shop commercials, right? Is it better to just say, okay, we'll license their likeness, and then they can do all the ads and commercials that their agents put them together to, and they're not having to do it, right? Or the flip side of being able to, from a big brand that wants to hyper-personalize their content to their individual consumer, okay, now I can make it more about you because I know what you look like, right? I know what you like, I know your colors, I know all these things, and so you can start to personalize these things. But I love the idea. I love what Carrie and that team did in saying, generative is here. People want to be able to generate these extravagant photo shoots. Currently, it'll cost them $2, $3, $4 million to run these things, right? But they still want that look, but they also still want that human connection. So this, you get the best. You can generate the scenes that you want. People can step back and say, yeah, I like this, I don't like that. We can adjust for that. And then you bring the models in at the end. So you still have that human connection. Right. You still have that human running around that the paparazzi sees, or they're at this party, or they're at the Super Bowl, right? But they didn't have to go out to these extravagant locations for $1.7 million.
Right.
Right.
And it, I gotta believe too, it trims excess. I remember this really funny, project I had. So I'm up at GM, and we were doing a big migration of one dam to another and all their assets. And they were telling the funny story about NASCAR and how they had to just like stop with the photography. They're like, guys, do not send me, 300 NASCAR photos. You pick 20 and give me those, because they would just get, their eyes would roll. They get flooded with NASCAR shots, and like so many of them look the same. And but there's got to be an efficiency about it too, because you're not wading through, like you said, if you got a huge photo shoot, you're not wading through, all of it after the fact, and you can be a lot more precise, I guess, in terms of what you're trying to generate, as opposed to sifting through what you got, I suppose would be one way of looking at it.
Right. And you have to, I think right now we're in this stage where I like to call like X or Twitter mom's refrigerator. Like everybody's doing these really cool art pieces and they're putting it up on mom's refrigerator. It looks great, but it's not super useful to the brands yet. To your point, right, if I've got this NASCAR shoot and I take 5 or 6, now I've got the ethos of the shot. Like I know kind of the setting, I know where I'm at. If I need to make adjustments, I should be able to generate those things. I should be able to move that around and get the shot that I want. Right. And I think that's the real power of AI, is if you can harness it, right? Like make it to where I'm going to give you the aesthetic, I'm going to give you the use, but now I still want the precision to get exactly what I want.
Right, exactly. Yeah, the fine-tuning piece.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious about much more boring content. So one of the challenges we've got is in regulated industries. So if it's like life sciences, healthcare, or FSI, and on the one hand, they all want that speed to market. They want the dynamic delivery. But with regulatory and things like that, they've got just really big challenges around how everybody gets comfortable with that. Well, one, with that speed of delivery, but also effectively modular content. I mean, you are building content on the fly. And so what they have to approve now is not the finished piece. They have to approve the logic that drives the finished piece. That's right. Like, and for us, that's kind of an interesting but challenging process piece. What's your take on, like, would you try to apply the tech to those kinds of situations? Yeah,
and we've done some work in CPG and FMCG to where, like, an ingredient changes. Right. We can no longer get this nut, or can no longer get this color, or the Canadian government has said you can't use this dye, right? And now suddenly all of your packaging has to change, right? And so some of these big brands that, like a Kraft Heinz or any of these really big brands, that costs money, right? Like significant amount of money to change and reprint and do all those things. And so where we see it as is make all those things dynamic, right? So where a regulation changes, that regulation is mathematics. Right? It's often that, right? Like your logo has to be 50% of the claim, and all of that stuff. And especially in healthcare too, there's like certain regulations that have to come in. The CDC makes a change, or the FDA makes a change, or whatever. And so if that stuff can become code, right? And the code is now filtering and running in as a data feed into your product, right? Now your art is driven off of the data. Versus a CMS to where somebody's going in there and hand changing all of these things. Exactly.
And you're making me think too that that's another big driver for modular content. I mean, everybody's going after modular content, but I always throw out the notion of granularity or parity, because if your content isn't at a level of parity in which you can apply those rules, you're kind of stuck.
You are.
And so that's a big factor too, is those two have to kind of meet in the middle. Otherwise you can't do it at a macro.
Well, and at the enterprise level, they're thinking about security, right? They're thinking about infosec. They're thinking about AI and what are the regulatory changes that are going to happen over the next 5-10 years that may look back at what we did. So everybody's really risk averse, right?
Yes.
The other thing is the squeaky wheel notion, right? Like if I'm enterprise and this is working, I'm not changing, right? We've got our pipeline, we've got it down. They're not always looking for the efficiencies that people like us that are innovators that are coming in and saying, why are you doing it this way? So the way that we've kind of positioned Optikka as a company is to let Charles and the technologists, the creative team, rush towards the latest technology. Like I want you to continue to push forward into everything to where now we're taking a still and we're pivoting onto a bus station and we're able to change a graphic on the bus station, right? And do that in real time. We want them to push. But then the other half of the house is the product team, right? And so we have like people that come out of Google and Waymo and self-driving cars and people that are more like, how do I productize this? How do I make this surgical so that I can get this one efficiency on the path to the other thing? So we think of Charles as offense, we think of product as defense, right? So we continue to know what's at the edge, but we're also making these fundamental changes for you because the realization that enterprise is not ready to just go holistically like, let's change everything, right? And we were talking earlier, like, there's the famous movie called Contact. Right? Do you remember the space movie Contact?
Oh, absolutely.
And I always think of Jodie Foster. Yeah, great movie, great thought exercise. Love that. And there's that time where the dad is in her ear saying, "Small moves, Ellie, small moves." Right? Because it's like, and I think corporate America is like small moves, because we've got all of this infrastructure. But I think what we're seeing now is there's too much noise and not enough signal. Right? Enterprise has to start getting closer to the signal. Yeah. So anyway, and so Charles, like he comes to us, he's like, hey, but I think I can do this and I think I can do this. I'm like, go, like what do you need? Like show me. Right? But then I have people like you or people like one of the big broadcasters that says, hey, we want to be able to do this, and their entire team is on board, but they can only do this one slice of it, right? Because everybody's a little too scared to like holistically blow everything up. So we're very conscious of that, and so if you think about banking or you think about pharmaceutical or any of those things, like think about Express Scripts, right? Like how much work they've done to get that process down and that regulatory process down to be able to do all those scripts at scale. It's the same thing I think with us with regulatory changes. Right? Making sure that that's a feed of data, getting it on the package, getting it out the door, getting it through approvals.
Well, I love your idea that it's effectively, formulas going against formulas,
100%.
Logic going against logic, and you're right. I think a lot of that, especially the MLR and those kind of review cycles, even risk-based reviews in that world, they just, somehow they'll have to get comfortable with adapting to just a different way of reviewing. You're reviewing a different context of how stuff gets generated and accept a certain level of risk, I suppose.
You do.
But just like risk-based reviews, if it's something that's super highly sensitive, sure, then put eyes on it. But determine what stuff can run through.
And you can go at the other end too, especially from a packaging perspective, because it's a physical item. So you could train computer vision to be at the end of the pack.
That's true.
To make sure, because you've got, depending on the printer, you've got variation in ink and bleed in the paper. Like there's all of these print-specific problems, but you can put, computer vision at the end and have another QA process before it goes out the door. And what is the level of variance that you're happy with?
You reminded, I can't remember the exact stat, but the number of license plates a police car can scan now in a second is like 600 plates. It's astronomical.
I know.
Right. So what you're talking
fast.
about is just like so far beyond what a human could even do. Yeah.
And the packages are great because it's like we know what our expectation is. We have the graphic file that it was going from.
Oh, that's a really good point.
Right.
You have that reference. It's not so much in the abstract.
That's right.
Yeah, that's really true. That helps quite a bit. Okay.
So we just have to keep everything, more than anything, like it's a flow of information. These things all need to just talk to each other. And that's our hard part, is to say, you've got this disparate organization, everybody's got their silos. Like, we still need to build a highway through our whole process.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That's awesome.
Fun talking.
A couple of Illinois guys.
I know, just a couple of Illinois guys from the farm field.
So